Welcome back to the Morning Cover podcast with me, Alan. Today, I'm joined by Vikki Kroll, CEO and co-founder of Esitu Solutions. They provide driver assessment and training focusing on hazard awareness and risk-taking. They use a really cool tech to do this, including the use of VR headsets. Vikki and I discussed some of the projects she's worked on over the last couple of years and talked through how hazard perception and risk-taking differs between newbie car drivers and seasoned professional HGV drivers, and how the hazard perception test isn't the best way to assess drivers with experience. Speaking of risk management, are you a transport manager looking at ways to improve the safety of your operators? Then you definitely need to check out the Transport Managers Collective, the #1 digital community specifically aimed at transport managers wanting to improve safety and compliance of their fleets. So yeah, go ahead and check out the TMC, link will be below. Anyway, that's enough from me, let's jump into the show. There you go. Well, then this is going to, if you do listen to any episodes back, you'll see that this is how we start the podcast. That is literally it. So hi Vikki, thank you for joining me. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. It's nice to finally get you on the podcast. I mean, we've been speaking on and off for a variety of things over the last few years. And it'd be nice to kind of share your story and what you do. Just for our listeners, because as always, we start chaotically with no real plan of how this goes about. I'm joined by Vikki today from Esitu Solutions. Vikki is the CEO and founder of Esitu. And the best person to talk about what Esitu does is probably Vikki herself. So do you want to give, probably for context, because you're not one of our more normal guests that comes from a specifically transport background, it'd be good to get a bit of context around why you're here and what you're here to talk about. So do you want to give you sort of like 30 seconds? It'll be more than 30 seconds. 30 seconds around what Esitu is and what it does to set context.
Yeah, sure. So Esitu Solutions is a spin-out company from Nottingham-Trent University with the primary aim of reducing collisions for fleets, obviously to save money, reduce the human and financial costs of a collision. Really, that's us in a nutshell, but that doesn't really tell the whole story.
No, I know. So, but I think well, no, do you know what? That's the quickest and most professional elevator pitch I've ever heard on one of these episodes. It normally, mostly because I ramble, everyone else seems to ramble around me, but that was very succinct. I think it sets context. We'll go through how and what and why and stuff in due course. But yeah, I guess, I mean, the reason I wanted to get you on, because ultimately what Hub plans to do and what we want to try and promote to our listeners on this kind of show is safety and compliance. It's kind of a big part of what we do. And obviously we started talking way back when. Do you remember our first interaction? Do you remember when it happened?
I think I was feeling the effects of a long exhibition. Let's go with that. It'd been about 3 days. I think it was our first one. So it was the first time I'd ever experienced the exhaustion that comes with being sort of stood up there for 3 days. I was going to say selling your soul, so I'm just going to say it. Selling your soul at these events and talking to people. I think you came very late in the day and I'd got to pack up and I'd got so much stuff and I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired. I just want to get home.
Yeah, I think it was the CV show, wasn't it? Was it? I think it was the first event post-COVID.
Yes, I think it was.
I think post-COVID, it was the first post the initial lockdown. Yeah.
Yeah, I believe it was. I think it was, I want to say it was sort of October 2021, that would be about right. And I think it was one of the very first events, but unfortunately it happened, I think about 2 weeks after they lifted the sort of rules. And then it was the bank holiday and after the kids were still off school. So the turnout wasn't as great as we would have expected. But to be honest, with it being our first ever event, it was a really nice introduction to kind of, this is how you set up, this is how you do all of these bits and bobs, this is how you kind of talk to people without being there with having like hundreds of people around us in one. So it was a good kind of ease in, let's go with that, ease into it.
And I guess because you got quite a unique product, or the one you were promoting actually on the stand was quite unique. You needed one-to-one interaction to demonstrate it.
Exactly.
It was the VR headset, wasn't it, that you were promoting as sort of the product at that show primarily.
Yeah, I think at that time we were still quite in our research and development phase, and I think really the only thing at that point that we had that was sort of very not complete, but, beta version almost, was the VR. All of our online stuff that we've got now, I don't think the platform at that time was even in any kind of state that we could have used it. It was still being, in code phase. So I think we were demonstrating videos perhaps, but not the vehicle, as it were, to host them.
Yes,
Safety puns.
Yeah, no, I think that. Oh, I'm looking forward to it. I think it was. I went. It was the first time I've been to the CV show with the idea of kind of finding like-minded people. Like normally you go kind of looking for like networking with customers. Like obviously I wasn't on the stand. I was just wandering around as a punter and kind of looking at. I met quite a few people I'm still in touch with actually on that show. It was quite, as you say, I think it was quite nice. It wasn't quite as big as it should have been. That was obviously I'd say it was a long time ago. It wasn't actually that long time ago in the grand scheme of things, but I think we've been in 18 months. Yeah, something like that. Yeah. I think, but we've been in conversation kind of a lot since. We had a variety of ideas that we were going to partner with that kind of never really materialized. I think it's just kind of different pathways trying to solve slightly different problems and stuff. So yeah, I mean, where did the Esitu actually come from? I mean, you mentioned it spun out from Nottingham-Trent, but like, how did it come about? What was
It's quite a long story, so I'll try and keep it as brief as possible. So my background is as a psychologist. I have a psychology degree, and when I finished my PhD, obviously I was looking to do something. My PhD was very focused on sort of theoretical side of psychology, and I've always really been interested in sort of taking theory into the real world where it can have, a real world impact. Because I think, there's a lot of value in that. What's the point in doing all this research if it's never going to have an impact on something in the real world? When I was finishing my PhD, I was very lucky in that at the time, the other co-founder of the company, Professor David Krundle, he was advertising for a position at the university, so a postdoc. So the typical kind of, do your PhD, do your postdoc kind of thing. And that project was to basically develop hazard awareness tools for fire appliance drivers, so on blue lights, obviously driving under blue lights. And I was really interested in that project, and we started working together on that project for the first time, and it was just wonderful. And it was fantastic because David had been working in this area probably longer than he cares to admit, but since the mid-90s, since the very first DVSA clips were introduced, before they were even a part of the hazard perception test, he was working on trying to validate these clips there. So he started the research in the 90s, and we were picking up on this, with professional drivers. So this was 2015. We started working on this project, and sort of from there it sort of spiraled, I guess, because we started working on lots of other projects where we were developing these tools for other types of drivers, professional drivers as well. So we developed some for a national bus operator, HGVs, and we even worked with a consortium for Transport for London to develop some tools in virtual reality for London bus drivers as well. So we knew that what we were doing as a university, as researchers, was fantastic, because we knew that what it can do is it can identify risk in drivers. And obviously, if you can identify risk before it happens, you can save a lot of money and obviously save lives as well. But as a university, you're a research body. You don't sell things exactly. So we knew there was a business opportunity. We knew there was value in what we had, but we didn't really know sort of how to go about it. And I think for us, the main sparking point was when we went to, it was a driving instructors event actually, and David was giving a talk. And as part of that, they allowed us to have, like a little stand to kind of show our bits and whatnot off. And we took a VR headset, and the driving instructors put it on and had a demo, and we're like, oh, this is fantastic. Where can we buy it? And we were like, oh, we don't sell it. We're at university. So it was kind of that. And, for a long time, David and I had been saying, we really should consider about setting up a company to do this. And we went back to the university and said, look, right, we've got this really good idea. We know that people want it. What can we do? And the university sort of said, well, we are a university. We know we don't sell things. But then they came back with us and said there's this thing called, it's Innovate UK's iCure programme, which stands for Innovation to Commercialisation of University Research. mouthful, which basically allows you to have some funding. So we had to apply for it. It wasn't like we just got it. Gave us funding to go and do a worldwide market validation for 3 months. So off I trotted around the world for sort of 3 months to go and test, you know, our proposition with, you know, potential end users, suppliers, stakeholders, etc. And this allowed us to, we had to go through lots of different hoops with this, you know, sort of pitching to different potential investors.
I remember.
And stuff like that. All of that. And the outcome was that we were then selected. So there was, say, a group of, I don't know how many there was of us, but a certain amount of them were then selected to go on to apply to Innovate UK for some ring-fenced money, which would allow us to set up a company. And the thing that we always had at the university is we had all the wonderful content, but the thing that we never really had is the vehicle to get that to the end user. So, for example, when we did the project with fire service, we had all this great content and we gave it to them and just went, here you go. And they went, oh, what do we do with it? And they had to implement it into their own e-learning platform because we didn't at that time have anything. So our main focus in that first year of, you know, starting our Innovate UK project was to develop the platform because we knew that was the missing puzzle piece, as it were. We knew we had the content. Yeah. We just needed a way to get it to people. And at the same time, we also wanted the VR platform as well, because again, we had wonderful stuff in VR, but we couldn't get it to end users as well. We basically won that. We did our Innovate UK project, which started in May 2021, which is just before we met you at the event. So you met us quite early on in our journey. You know, our overall aim for that first 18 months was to get the project up and running, get the company up and running, get the vehicles, as it were, the online platform, the VR platform, to be able to host the wonderful content that we had. And now we've sort of moved out of that R&D phase, that we're still doing lots of stuff to develop more products, and kind of started pushing it out to, you know, potential end users, which, you know, are our fleets, our transport managers, who can use it, you know, as part of their health and safety to help identify risk and help towards their compliance. I don't think I kept that very short, but that's a quite detailed explanation of where we came from.
Psst, out of there. Just a quick introduction to the show quickly. I just want to let you guys know of a brand new product that I am super proud that we've launched over the last couple of months. The Transport Managers Collective, or TMC for short, is a digital community of TMs to share best practice and ultimately improve safety and compliance on our roads. Not only that, it's been designed to foster close, meaningful connections with other like-minded individuals to help improve your own mental health and reduce that sense of isolation that many TMs face in their professional roles. As I said, I'm super proud of this community. So do go check it out by going to www.tmcollective.co.uk and use the code FREETRIAL to get your first month free. Anyway, that's enough from me. Now back to, well, me. Yeah, I mean, so why was it the fire service as the first thing that you kind of, was that just where the funding was when you and David first met?
So I mean, when I first met, obviously it was a funded project, and it was funded by the Fire Research and Training Trust, who they have calls out for things to make drivers safer. Obviously, you know, emergency services, anyone who's driving emergency services, they're at 5 times a greater risk of a fatal collision than the general population. You know, they're driving against normal traffic rules for a start. So they do have a greater risk. And whilst they do have, you know, training that's implemented, and they have refresher training and stuff, they're always looking for something else. And David had engaged, I think, with someone within the fire service, and he, you know, gone and sort of said, this is what we do with normal drivers. We want to take this to the fire service. And, you know, obviously professional drivers are more at risk of fatality anyway. So it was to really start targeting the professional drivers. And yeah, it was, again, partly due to that, partly due to that's where we had a bit of funding for that project. And, you know, it was a fantastic project to work on. I think back to it as pretty much some of the best days of my life, because it was so much fun. Work shouldn't be that fun, but it was fantastic. I used to get to go to...
Why was it so fun?
Well, first of all, I got to spend 2 weeks in a fire car. So we did it with fire cars, so like emergency responders. I got to sit filming from, you know, blue light driving from 2 weeks in a car, and then another 2 weeks from a fire appliance filming. So, I mean, that just, fun in itself. So I got to experience something that, most people never get to sit in a fire engine when it's on blue lights, do you? So that was really great.
No.
Fantastic. And then the next bit was obviously what we do when we develop our content. It's not just a case of, we go out and film it, we put it together and go, oh yeah, that's a test that can tap into that skill. We go through a whole process of we have to validate it. And validation is typically where we kind of make the initial test, what we think based on our sort of research experience are the best clips. But what we have to do is go out and test that on actual drivers. So the way that we, typically test that with any kind of drivers is we take either sort of novice drivers and experienced drivers, and we get them to do the test. And what we will generally find is that your experienced drivers will perform better on the test than your novice drivers. In that way, you can say it's tapping into that skill. That's sometimes a bit of a challenge because just for context, what do these tests entail? Just so I've seen some of these clips, I know what they are, but give us an example for our listeners to sort of like visualize what we're talking about here. Yeah, sure. So it depends on the test, but when I speak about sort of hazard perception, I'm not talking about the typical hazard perception test. Anyone who's sort of in driver training, particularly in professional driver training, will go, nah, hazard perception test doesn't work for me. I pressed too soon. And that's something that we acknowledge and we know that. So we've developed a different variant of the test called our hazard prediction test. So basically, in the test, you watch it from the perspective of the driver, similar to the hazard perception. And just as the hazard's about to onset, the screen cuts out and you get asked what happens next. And you get 4 options on the screen, one of which is what actually happens next. And it's based on the theory that if you are looking where you should have been looking at the right time, you'll know what the answer is. And that's what we find. We pretty much always find that experienced drivers will be better able to predict those hazards than your novice drivers. And the same thing goes for what we call like sort of based on safety. So your safe drivers versus your less safe drivers. So we sort of typically split that up in terms of previous collision risk. So how many collisions someone's had in their past driving, because that's a good predictor of how many you're going to have in your future as well. So either we use novice drivers and experienced or sort of safe versus less safe drivers to validate a test.
I kind of feel like, I mean, just as a segue here, like prediction is far better than perception for like, well, why is it not a hazard? Why is it not a hazard prediction test that you sit when you become a driver and when you retrain and stuff? Why is it not that?
I have to be careful what I say on that one, because obviously the DVSA hazard perception test is used in initial license acquisition, and yeah, there is a hell of a lot of evidence that links the actual test that these sit at the DVSA one to collision risk. I mean, the research goes back to the 60s, I believe, and there's a lot of evidence that suggests that that score, that how fast you detect that hazard, links to your likelihood of a collision in the future, which is fantastic, and it does work for learner drivers. We know that it saves nearly £90 million per year. We know that it saves, I think it's 8,500 fewer damage-only collisions per year. We know it saves money. We know that it makes drivers safer, and it does work in that context. But when you start moving to professional drivers, the test that you've got for the normal hazard perception test, you have got this issue where driving instructors and professional drivers, experienced drivers, they do press too soon. And part of that is because, A, the initial test is normed on learner drivers. There's no guidance as to where those onset and offset windows are. We don't know where they are. We don't know where the government sets them. So it's a little bit, it's hard to kind of say and then translate that into professional drivers. So, and also the other thing is that, we all have different sort of thresholds for what we consider to be hazardous. So, your novice driver might see a hazard and press a bit sort of later because they've seen it a bit later. Your experienced driver might see the hazard but think, nah, that's not hazardous enough for me to press the button. But then as it develops a bit more, they might then press. But then that score is no different to the novice one. And it's not that they've not seen it. It's just that it's not crossed that threshold for what they consider to be hazardous enough. So yeah, there's, and also one of the big,
I guess extending that even, sorry to interrupt, I guess extending that even further is actually, I think we spoke about this, in the past about, tiredness, but also, mood and kind of, mental state on how you perceive and predict risk as well. I think have you done a study on that? I'm pretty sure you spoke about something along those lines.
We possibly have. So we have been developing. So that, I mean, obviously our hazard prediction test taps into that sort of hazard awareness skill. And that is, you know, one of the only skills that has been consistently linked to collision risk. But the sort of tests that we're developing at the moment, and we have got developed, are more tapping into the risk taking skills of drivers. So, and we've developed one which we call our headway test, which is very simple test. You are driving a vehicle, whether a van, HGV, car, whatever, and you're behind another vehicle. The test stops and you have like a sliding scale, and it draws the car in front closer or further away. And you have to answer, you know, what distance would you feel comfortable being at? And we've looked into this, again, validating this test in a sort of similar way to we do with the hazard one. And we found that this can predict violations in drivers. So those that are saying they'd be closer are more likely to be aggressive violators and normal violators. So again, I mean, we developed this test really because often what a lot of companies use when they do sort of risk assessments and online assessments is they use sort of questionnaire-based assessments is what I'm trying to say. And one of the questions that's often brought in there is sort of things like, you know, how often will you go through an amber traffic light? And obviously, if your boss is looking at you going, you know, your job depends on this, they're going to go, never. But we've developed another test, which is basically, again, taps into that skill, but it doesn't ask the question explicitly. And it's not so hard to manipulate in terms of, you know, giving a socially desirable answer. And it's the same with the headway test as well. It's harder to kind of give socially desirable answers when it's video based. And we do have in our system as well anti-cheat systems in there. So if someone is answering in a way that looks like they're trying to cheat the system, it'll flag it straight up, and they'll be, you know, the manager can kind of bring them in and go, hang on a minute, what have you been doing here? So yeah, again, so we have.
How could they?
And mistaken.
I was like, how could someone cheat on your system? What's defined as cheating? Because if
it depends on the test. So it's quite hard to explain without it sort of visually being there and kind of trying to break down the kind of the psycho analytic components of the test. But the way the test is set up, it's the way it's scored. So you can tell from a score if someone's if someone's always choosing the furthest away distance. So for example, in our amber light test, you come up to a traffic light and it goes amber, and you get asked how likely would you be to go through. There are certain situations where it is safer to go through that traffic light, and that's what the highway code states. You know, and if someone is going through that traffic light and always saying, I'd never go through that, even when it's safe to do so, we can flag that up and say, hang on a minute, you're not answering in the way that it should be, because it's pretty obvious that is the answer that you should be giving. So it's quite a nifty way of being able to do it. So yeah, but they can't really cheat on it with that test.
That's good. It's good to know, because I think you mentioned the word e-learning, and I'm sure that triggered a lot of our listeners, because e-learning is traditionally not particularly well viewed and understood. And we've all done the death by PowerPoint, clicker, multiple choice, and just like click, 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 tick, click, click, tick sort of thing. So yeah, I think knowing that the system is a little bit more engaging. To be fair, I've seen some of your content both on VR and non-VR, and yeah, I would thoroughly recommend people kind of having a play and having a go, because it is quite different to your traditional e-learning kind of stuff. So yeah, I think I interrupted you about 10 minutes ago about I think you were how you validate your tests. So you go out and do it. You go out and put a test together, which I think we now got a bit more context of what that means, like a video clip with a scenario with a question at the end. How do you then validate that they are going to, how do you validate that it works?
So this is, I mean, it's funny because, you know, when you look at the end result of our tests, you know, you're watching, you know, video tests, and it looks very, it's seamless. It looks very simple, but, you know, the work that goes in behind it in terms of validation is a massive scale project. So, you know, what we do is we say, for example, we've gone out and we've filmed, we've chosen, say, 60 potential clips that we think, you know, we'd get our team of traffic and transport psychologists to review them. Typically, we take that to a focus group as well with driver trainers of that particular vehicle. So we don't just film from cars, we film from different types of vehicles. So we typically get a focus group to go through that and go, that's good, that's not so good. So that's kind of the first iteration. The second iteration is we take it out and test it on actual drivers. So like we say, we'd get novice drivers, experienced drivers. If we can, it is hard to get novice drivers because there's obviously fewer novice drivers, and also they're not always necessarily willing to engage with it because there's fewer of them is one of the problems. If we can't do that, we typically split them by, like I say, collision risk. We get them to do, say we've taken that 60 from the focus group, we've taken out 10 that we've gotten out of their NAF. We'll test them on all 50. And then what we'll then do is we go through them and we see the clips where your experienced have outperformed your novice ones. I mean, in an ideal situation, what you would hope to happen is that when you do the analysis, you do the stats, you see, experienced overall outperform novice. And that does happen most of the time, but occasionally there will be a few duffers in there, which they're just not tapping into that hazard awareness skill. So you kind of need to take them out. So that's what we go through. Look overall, look on an individual basis, chuck out again the ones that we don't like. And then the next stage, because obviously that's kind of being a bit almost like fishing in a way, what you would then do is you would then take those clips and then test them on a new group of people to then make sure, okay, yes, that test has worked. And then what you will find is that your experienced overall outperform your novice, or your low risk outperform your high risk. And then at that point we can say the test is valid. And obviously that is a very, very long process because you've got a lot of driver recruitment to do, a lot of stats.
So I was going to say, what's your sample size? Like if you got 50 videos to test, do you test all 50 on all your first sample that you take and you get them to test all 50 videos? How many overall, but then how many do you have in each group? Like, is it tens, hundreds, thousands? What's the sort of scale we're looking at?
I mean, obviously the more the better. But when you kind of do as many as you can get, I mean, we would never make someone sit through 50 clips in one go because they'd be there for quite some time. And obviously their engagement with that by an hour would have dropped off. You start
skewing the data, right? You definitely skew the data by doing that, wouldn't you? So
yeah, we don't do that. We would maybe break them down into sort of like, 1 to 15, 16 to 30, and test them on different groups of people. And the answer to how many, as many as possible. We've had studies where we've had hundreds, and we've had studies where we've had, less than 100 people, but you still get the effect because the effect is quite strong. So you will still get it, but obviously the more the better. But a lot of it comes down to pragmatics, logistic, time, and who you can get in to do it. If you start looking at more specific groups like HGV drivers, they're harder to get hold of. So you do what you can.
Yeah, I guess this goes back to your original point of why you moved into this world, is wanting to look at the practical application of theoretical kind of concepts, but with that practical application, you then get the real world to contend with, and actually finding test subjects can be tough. Do you like, for example, you started off doing the fire appliances, and I say, can we talk I won't mention it, that's as far as it goes, but obviously you say about working with specific types of road users, so you kind of work with kind of blue lights, and then you've done like bus drivers. Do you work with individual organizations and then use them as the test subjects?
So it depends on that. That depends on sort of like what they're willing to do. Obviously the test that we provide them that they're going to pay for, we wouldn't give them an unvalidated test. It would be they have a test that's been validated, but perhaps as part of it we might ask as a favor, do you mind if we look at your data? Because obviously the more data you get in, you can still go back and refine things. So yeah, we would ask permission first. We wouldn't just do it without their consent. Look at the data, it would be anonymized anyway. But if we've got stuff that is new, we might go back to that client and say, would you mind testing your drivers on something we're developing? And then they get a free go on it, and also we get the data from that as well. So that's one way that we do it with that. On the other side of that, we've worked with organisations that aren't necessarily a client, but are just very friendly, happy people to help with it. So we've got a local HGV company, when we were developing some HGV content that, you know, we just sort of rang up and said, would you mind us sticking a 360 camera on one of your HGVs and driving around for 2 weeks? No problem, that's fine. Do you mind if we use your drivers to validate it? No problem, that's fine. So yeah, we do have people that, you know, are willing to assist and are willing to help. Most people, I think, are pretty willing to help because they see the value in it. And obviously, longer term, we hope that they would, you know, want to use it with their drivers as well.
And ultimately, if it can reduce things like obviously reduce risk and incidents and such forth, but if it can reduce insurance premiums as well, it's going to actively save people money. It's the conversation I have over and over again with people. It's just like safety and compliance is not just hazard perception, hazard awareness, but general safety and compliance is, if you do it properly, it actively saves you money. I just don't get it why people don't put as much weight on it as they should do, but. We're both two ultimately compliance-based kind of individuals. We give a shit about this, so therefore we're going to talk about it. So yeah.
I completely agree.
One question. Sorry. Yeah. So one question I had actually, just in terms of like you say you test it on like high risk and low risk drivers. Do you classify risk, or is this something that there is a standard? I must say is there a standardized risk scale for drivers? Do you make it up? Do you take that? How do you do that?
We use it on sort of our own sort of internal kind of like algorithms that we've developed over, you know, the last God knows how many years. We've done it so many times that we sort of have a formula. We typically, obviously, when we're giving out, not when working with a client, but when we're working in research, we would give out, you know, sort of questionnaire about driving history. So it wouldn't just be like, you know, how many collisions have you had? It would be, how many collisions have you had that are your fault, the severity, the cost of the collision. So it's based on kind of like I use the word algorithm, but quite loosely, based on a principle on that we've kind of devised. So yeah.
I guess you're asking too much questions like how many points in your license, like things like that.
All of that.
Do you find that drivers are honest on those questionnaires?
Now that's a very good question, and it is it's something we have to rely upon. Basically, we have to rely upon them being as honest as possible, because, you know, when you're working in research, people have got nothing to lose by being honest, because we're just researching it. Obviously, if we were we wouldn't go into a company and go, oh, how many collisions have you had? Because at that point, they probably maybe wouldn't be as honest. Or, you know, you can always ask, you know, the management if they were allowed to share that information. But we haven't come across that situation. In a research environment, they have got no reason not to be honest, because it's all anonymized anyway. We can't link any data back to any individual. But that's not to say that people aren't going to be dishonest about it. It's a risk that there's no other way of being able to do it.
Yeah. I guess it's a I wouldn't say quantifiable risk, but it's just one you've got to accept, really, isn't it? So
it's noise in the data, and, you know, at the end of the day, you're never going to have clean data. You're going to accept that there are other factors in there that are, you know, impacting on the data, but that's the nature of real world research. Otherwise, it would, you know, you can't control everything like you can in the lab.
Yes, yeah, I think that's what makes it fun, I guess. So. So I mean, I guess, how can our listeners actually, how can it, like, we'll talk about how they can get in touch with you in a sec. Like, we'll get your LinkedIn details, your email address, your website, all that sort of stuff. But I was thinking, like, how does it work in the real world? If a operator who went, oh, do you know what? The idea of this sounds great. I can see, well, first of all, what is the quantifiable benefit to an operator? Let's say we've got a whole year of 10, 15, 20 vehicles, 25 drivers, and they've listened to this podcast and go, okay, I can see it conceptually what it does, but what's the real world benefit to me as an operator? What is the benefit, and then how can they reap those benefits?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's several benefits. I mean, in terms of sort of, if someone came to me with, you know, 25 drivers, what we could, depending on what they would want, obviously, if they're wanting to do VR, the story is a little bit different if they wanted to use the online stuff, but I'll use the online stuff as an example. So they'd come to us, we'd go through, demonstrating it. They'd onboard their drivers onto the system, and what they would do is they'd go through the assessments, and it would give them a risk-based sort of score from that in terms of, high, medium, low risk. So it's providing that sort of risk element towards, your health and safety. I've done this, I've risk assessed them, I've provided that, and we can provide guidance, on what to do afterwards. We can provide online training. In terms of like the benefits, obviously being able to identify drivers who are more at risk of a collision, they can provide training. But not everyone's going to use it, before sort of, acquisition or recruitment stage. They might use it in refresher training. But again, it's a good way of being able to kind of go, right, okay, so these drivers are more at risk. We've got, clients that have got, several different depots across the country. And what we can do on the system is break it down by sort of depot. And what you might find is that at certain depots you're having, maybe the hazard perception isn't so great across all of those drivers. And actually you think, well, maybe that's something to do with the training. So it can kind of identify where your training needs lie. In terms of, financial benefits, we have got one client that basically took what we'd been doing with them to their underwriters, and their underwriters, reduced their insurance premium by more than they were actually paying us. So they definitely got a benefit from that, which was, fantastic for our case story. But then I'm thinking, oh, maybe we should talk more. But no, and they're a fantastic client.
I think a lot of people will kind of ask, what's the ROI? What is the return on the investment? Like, if I'm going to spend hundreds of thousands a year on a system, is it going to provide me with enough quantifiable value? Because especially in this this economic kind of climate we're in at the moment, the nice to haves are definitely the first things to get cut, and compliance is always the bottom of the pile. Still, it was always the least valued anything. So you kind of need to show real quantifiable like ROI. So I think, speaking to insurers is a good example, actually. I guess that's the benefits. How does it actually work there? So you say you onboard the clients. There's obviously the test. So it's like a standalone. They do the 50 clips or the 25 clips or whatever it is that's applicable to their. So how many is it?
Well, it depends on the test. We typically recommend about 15 for a hazard prediction test, 12 to 15 for a risk-based test. It really depends on the test. But I mean, again, that's not a hard and fast rule. A client could come and say, I want them to do 30. We'd maybe convince them that perhaps 30 was not the right number to do. It might be a little bit too many in the first instance, but it's ultimately up to them. The system's pretty flexible in terms of what we can provide them. But essentially, if someone came to us, it's quite a simple onboarding process. Actually, it's a case of we set up their manager with a manager's dashboard, which allows them to access their drivers' dashboards. So there's two ways they can do it. They can onboard their drivers, which is just a case of clicking a button, entering their email. If they don't have an email, we have a PIN number, because we have a couple of clients that don't actually have company emails. So they just get a PIN number and they can log in through that. So it just sends basically like an invite to their inbox if they've got an email. If they haven't got an email, then they have to pass back the PIN obviously to that person for them to log in. And it's sort of a personalized dashboard where they'll get assigned. So if they've got assigned a test, they'll see it straight away. So if they can't miss it, it's right there. You need to do this test now. And then once they've done that, they can see it in the other bit of the dashboard where they get like the results, and it tells them sort of what they are and like high, medium, low. But they don't have to be told that. So that is up to their manager. So some people might want it to say exactly how they've scored and provide feedback. I've had others go, no, I don't want them to know how they've scored. I want to take the results to them and kind of be like, here you go. That's easier.
Makes sense.
So, again, that's kind of quite flexible in the system.
So as a manager, you then can see all your drivers listed, and then you can start seeing how they all compare to each other, and then you can filter by depot and that sort of thing. So I guess, there you go.
No, it's fine. You go.
I guess it's you provide. I think there is a slight delay between our feeds, which I think why we keep talking over each other. So I apologise to any listeners that might hear that. It's not ideal. What I was saying was, I guess it provides the data to the managers for them to then use, and they, like as you say, like if a depot has got one of 10 depots is significantly lower than the rest, you could look at that, and I guess you could infer that maybe it's a more complicated site to drive around, maybe it's the recruitment policy that runs at that depot, maybe it's just actually the local transport manager that runs that is maybe not as competent on this. All of those things, you don't tell them the conclusions, you just show them the results, and they can draw the conclusions from that. I guess that's how it works.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we can have an in-depth conversation with them of, you know, sort of like what you've just said. Oh, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this. But obviously we're not at that depot. We don't know. They're in a better position to kind of go, oh, okay, that is the problem. If it is, you know, something that's outside of the hazard perception type thing, you know, if it is a, you know, potentially a manager, or, like you say, it could even be a depot that's harder to drive around, something like that. Yeah, anything like that, really.
So I think that's something that we're trying to do at Hub with our platform is we want to pull a load of data into one place so that people can infer, like, you can only make decisions based on data, or you should only make decisions based on data, really. If you can have that data to hand, at least you can draw your own conclusions based on a complete data set. And I think that's, rather than promising that we can make the decision for you, it's the data that you make the decision on. So is it just the test that Esitu kind of does, or do you have like remedial training within the platform that high risk drivers can maybe do?
Yeah, so we have got training modules at the moment that we have on there that we do offer as part of it, and we are kind of growing and adding to that training kind of package as well. So we've probably got actually more training in virtual reality than we have on the platform. But again, anything that's in VR, we can translate it back into what we call single screen, so used for normal computers. But that's what we're really working on at the moment is the training side of things as well. But yeah, both assessment and training, and we can put together like packages that are sort of like classroom based if necessary, if someone wants that, based around what we've got.
I guess if there's an entire depot or entire group of drivers that need that support, maybe in person for that whole group is not necessarily a bad shout, because obviously e-learning is the devil, according to them. So in terms of like, I'm not going to talk about cost because I think it's too hard to predict what an individual would need and want, and therefore, like, it's not. I'm guessing you charge per learner or per driver rather than per. Is it like is it a subscription or is it a one-off fee?
We do it on a per seat basis. So one user doing one test counts as one seat. So one user doing two tests counts as 2 seats. 2 users doing one test would be 2 seats. I think that makes sense. We're trying to make it. Yeah. So it's basically you're buying an assessment for one driver at a time. That's the kind of the cost way it is at the moment. So
do you have a target ICP like customer that you like working with, or is it anyone that has a license that drives? Do you have like, are you specializing in HGVs or blue lights? Is it from a commercial aspect? I know that you have fingers and lots of pies in terms of research, but in terms of where do you really commercially drive forward, which is the pathway that you're most down at the moment?
And basically anyone with occupational road risk, so kind of all of the above, as it were. We have, tests that are developed for, cars, so that can target, your professional car drivers as well as your grey fleets included within there. We've got stuff for vans, HGVs, buses as well. So anyone with occupational road risk, and it is targeted at the professional driver market, not so much the learner driver market, because let's be honest, anyone who's learning to drive their test isn't that excited about road safety necessarily. They're more interested in kind of getting their test, training for the hazard perception test that they actually have to pass to get their driving license. So that market with learners it's pretty saturated already with plenty of providers that can provide training for that particular test. Our test is about improving safety and identifying risk in those where it is, to drive professionally, those who already have a driving license.
Okay. So how can a listener get in touch with you? What's the best way of them sort of reaching out and finding out a bit more?
Either via our website or, email directly. Either of those is absolutely fine.
Cool. I'll put those links in the show notes so people can, rather than try and scribble it down, because most of our listeners drive and they're not going to write this down when they're driving, because that's a big risk to safety. So I'll put it in there so they can click it and go through to your website and email you as well. Is there anything else that I've not asked that you think can kind of like help our listeners in terms of what you do and how you do it?
Oh gosh. I feel like I've been quite focused on the online side of things. I don't think I've really spoken too much about the VR side of things. Actually, that's a fair point. I was gonna ask how can, obviously the VR stuff can be seen as a bit gimmicky. I mean, I've done it. It's not. It is actually really, really good. But how can a operator actually make use of it unless they have VR headsets? Is there a way of doing it? Yeah. So the way we typically do it is, we've got, it even depends on the client. We've got clients who are just online only. We've got clients that are VR only. We've got ones that have got a bit of both. So they've got some online and they've got some VR as well. So, but the way that we do it with that is that we provide the headsets. So we will get the headsets and we kind of sideload it with basically our app and all of our content. And then they get it as part of the package. Alternatively, we have got clients that lease the headsets from us as well, so that kind of lasts for a year. This is more of like a subscription. It's not, we can't possibly do this one seats because there's not really any way of us being able to track the number of seats that people are using. Yeah. So it's kind of a yearly subscription, and that's what they get that. And it's used very much in the same way as the online side of things. But the benefits really from the VR is that it is that bit more immersive, and it is possibly a little bit more engaging as well, because they're sat in it and they can look 360. They can see, they can check the blind spots, they can look down the road. So they've got more of the world to kind of engage with. So possibly, the learning benefits. And in some of our research, we've demonstrated that it is as good, if not better, than the online side of things, but it's definitely more engaging and more immersive. And
I think that's the thing is, that's exactly the point. Is it's not just the psychological or like actual like analytical side that you get from it. I think it's just people are probably more likely to engage with it because it's something a bit different. There's not, I think there is some VR training out there that's now part of the Force pathway. I think there's some trainers that are now moved some of the Force training online to VR headsets, which is cool. Yes. I think it is kind of a bit different. People are not used to it. People are used to sitting in front of a computer screen and just going click, click, click. So having a little bit of kind of a bit of a different style of delivery, I think is interesting and a bit unique, which is nice.
And it's quite exciting that that Force have, I think it's Fleet Source that have got the first Force accredited VR course for the safe urban driving course. So the one where
that one.
Typically, when you go out on the bikes, they now do that part in the headset. Which obviously, if you're doing CPC in winter and it's very badly raining outside, you can put the headset on and do that as part of it rather than going out on the bike. There are a couple of courses as well, I believe, that have been approved by Jout as part of the CPC as well.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Yeah. A company is, I think it's Net 360, are working with somebody else for that. So for us, it's quite exciting because the fact that VR is now getting, as part of, Jout accredited courses and CPC and stuff, and even that one of them has been, Force accredited, it's starting to pave the way for VR for us as well. Yeah. It's going, okay, so people are taking it seriously. And this is something that we are going to be looking at in the next year is developing potentially our own VR course that will be used for CPC. So we are examining. Yeah. We are going down that route, but it will be a bit of time.
I say you're a startup. You're not a massive team with unlimited budget. So you have to prioritize where you spend your time and stuff. But no, it's interesting. So I guess that was going to be my last sort of question before we wrap up is what does the future hold for Esitu? Like you said about kind of CPC courses as a potential. What are the stuff apart from this we can't talk about yet? What else is in the pipeline?
Well, yeah, I mean, in the pipeline, with hopefully we'll be having 2 grants this year. Both of them I can't actually talk about, but yeah, we'll be looking into developing both. One of them's not decided yet, but the other one is. But I can't talk about it just yet until it's released publicly. But yeah, for us, developing our content is a big thing for us. We are always developing new content. We want to kind of make our back catalogue of content, as extensive as possible, move into different vehicles as well. So, and I think this is something you've touched upon as well in this whole meeting, is that the people that really engage with possibly Hub and with Esitu are those that are kind of like, the proactive approaches to road safety, the companies that really want to take it under the belt and go, you know what, I don't want these collisions to happen. Unfortunately, I think there are a lot of organisations that are perhaps a little bit more retrospective when it comes to that, and maybe only go with the sort of legally mandated sort of training. So for us, getting the CPC course and running that and having that going, it begins to target some of the companies that are a little bit more compliance led rather than sort of safety led. But I mean, it's still going to have impact in there as well. So for us, it's trying to access as much of the market as possible, because we know that what we do is good. We know it can help reduce collisions. There's a heck of a lot of evidence behind it, and that's really where we're coming from. We're coming from that. This is science, and we want to make your drivers safer. We want to ultimately, our goal is to reduce on-road collisions, and we want that for our clients as well. But obviously, for there's a big cost reduction in terms of reducing those collisions as well. So there's a lot of other benefits that come from that thing.
And I guess coming on podcasts like this is a way of sharing that story with kind of the target audience. And I think, that's why I was keen to get you on. I'm grateful that we finally got a date in that we could do this, because I think what you guys do is fantastic. And I've really enjoyed sort of watching your journey from afar at times, but sort of seeing where you're going. So I've really enjoyed having you on to talk about this, and maybe there's partnerships and things in the future that we can come back and revisit. We're as I say, we're both startups. We both work at a million miles an hour on different things all the time, and sometimes they can line up, sometimes they don't. I think we'll see. But the CPC training is really interesting. Actually, that's something that I'd be really interested to follow more closely, because I think that'll unlock a big market for you, I think. So I think we'll wrap. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think as I say, I think that's really the thing that's going to bring it in front of people that don't really care about safety. And I think the only thing I would say, as long as you keep it priced appropriately so that it is comparable to them doing the other ones, then it's kind of a no-brainer for them to choose. That's the only thing I would sort of, my only concern is if it becomes too expensive.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of drivers, they do have this, like you say, death by PowerPoint kind of thing for the CPC as well. So being able to offer something that's a bit different that we know will impact on their safety is definitely got to be a bonus in their fleet managers. I think my last point on that is I was actually talking to a transport manager yesterday, but he's also a CPC trainer. But first and foremost, he's a driver. And so when he runs his CPC courses, they actually listen to him, or so he says anyway. I mean, I assume he seems like a down-to-earth guy and a straight-laced guy, straight to the point guy. I'd assume he would actually say that, but the drivers listen to him because I've been there, where so many people that deliver this sort of training are not drivers. And so actually they've just learned the PowerPoint to deliver it. And I think, obviously, I know you're not I'm assuming you're not a HGV driver. It's never necessarily come up, but I'm assuming you're not, but you come from a different angle. This course that you create, it would be it's not like this is the right way to do it. It's just like, this is a new way of delivering the information. I think people would engage with it really well. So we won't be delivering the courses as well, because we're well aware that we aren't HGV drivers. I may have driven a HGV round what do you call it? The thing called where you round the forecourt thing, and it was probably one of the most scariest moments of my life. Fantastic, but very scary. But no, we certainly aren't HGV drivers, and we wouldn't want to go in and go, this is how you should drive, and that's not what we ever wanted to do. But I think we won't be delivering the courses when when it's available, we'll be working with a partner that will be delivering.
Yeah. I think that will increase the value of it to the driver and to the learner, I think, rather than trying to profess you say you're something where you're not. So I think on that note, we'll wrap up. So I just want to say thank you very much for finally coming on the pod. I've really enjoyed chatting. I hope you have too. And I will put all your things in the show notes so that people can follow you and find you and talk to you and stuff. So, thank you very much for joining me, Vikki. And I'll speak to you soon. Cheers.
See you later. Bye.
Big thank you to Vikki for joining me this week, and thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Morning Cuppa podcast. If you liked this week's episode, be sure to go ahead and leave us a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast from. That will help us get in front of even more transport professionals just like you. As always, I love chatting to other transport professionals, so go ahead and find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, all the links will be in the description. That's all from me. Once again, thanks for listening to the show. I've been Alan, and this has been the Morning Cuppa podcast.